Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfoud, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Medieval Church History. I am Teresa Holman, and honored to be here today with Father Michael Witt. Welcome, Father.
Oh, thank you, Teresa.
We've had some really fabulous shows recently, and today we're going to be entering the First Crusade, I believe.
That's right, yeah. We're going to be looking at the challenges that the Byzantines had. No sooner do they split with the church in the West. We have the schism that takes place, and within a matter of a couple decades, they realize that they're in really big trouble. We'll take a little look at the shifts in the sands of Islam around 1000 AD. There's a lot of stuff underway, a lot of things happening, and so finally one of the Byzantine emperors realizes he's in pretty deep doo-doo and he needs some help from the West. Turns to the Pope. The Pope then preaches a crusade, and what they thought was going to be the crusade, it turns out to be the First Crusade, gets underway. So it's a fascinating story.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay, good. As I say, there's a great crisis taking place around 1000 in Byzantium, and that's because of the growth of a foe in the East. The Byzantine Empire has had many Eastern problems. They certainly had the Parthians they had to deal with, and then you have the rise of Islam also, and that's going to be a real problem. This time around, the threat is going to be a very warlike group of people called the Turks, and particularly the Seljuk Turks. And in 1055, they succeeded in seizing the city of Baghdad. And so, the land between the two rivers, this is big stuff. Just 100 years earlier, this group had converted to Islam.
Okay.
And it was one of the big moves as far as Islamic history is concerned. After the first 5 caliphs, and after the huge expansion of Islam all throughout, out of the Arabian Peninsula, all throughout North Africa, up into Spain, all throughout the Middle East, and all the way over heading toward the east, toward Persia, and even a little bit into India. There's this huge. Then all of a sudden, it just kind of just sat there. There wasn't any real movement, and some people would even say that it was a dying religion, or certainly one in a coma. And then with the conversion of the Seljuk Turks, it breathes new and very militant life into Islam. Prior to the coming of the Turks, Islam looked upon itself as being a united ummah, this sense of the house of Islam. And it was under a caliph. Remember we had talked about the caliph as being the successor of the prophet. And from a political point of view, he's not really a religious leader. He's more of a political leader, but a political leader in the sense of a sheikh. He's like the wise dispenser of justice over the entire household or the tribe. And even that really had become something of an anachronism, a thing of the past. By the time you get to around 1000 AD, you do have now a couple caliphs rather than just one. Probably the single most important caliphate in Islam was the one that was located in Egypt. And this was called the Ismail Fatimids because they claimed to be descendants of Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad. And, of course, remember the wife of Ali, the 5th caliph, and therefore they are members of the party of Ali, therefore they are Shia. Okay. Now they hold much of Arabia, Palestine, the Holy Land, across North Africa, especially Egypt, and then Syria. So they're going to hold the center position of the Islamic world. But there are other caliphates besides that. Iraq was a caliphate, Iran, even into Central Asia. But each of those came under the domination more and more of these Turkish warlords. And the term that a Turkish warlord is an amir. So they're dominated by Turkish amirs, despite the fact that they might be Persian or they might be Arab or Central Asia, any number of groups of people. But the powerhouses in each of these caliphates is going to be these warlords, these amirs.
Okay.
And there will be some resentment. We'll be seeing this a little bit later, some resentment. So. And then we'll look at some of the others, especially over into Spain too. But even as you have a political decline of the potency of Islam, with the exceptions of these Turks that are coming in, these new converts, even as much as there's a decline in that, there is a revival underway in the area of learning and of philosophy and also a renewal of faith. And this is especially true in certain cities and in certain academies that are being established. So even as you have a political decline in the Islamic world, you have a renaissance of learning. Some of this is due to the discovery and the translation from Greek into Arabic of some of the great philosophers, especially Aristotle.
Okay.
Okay, and that spurs an awful lot of interest. Over in Spain, for instance, you've got the original post-Caliphate rulers, the Umayyad Caliphate. Now, the Umayyads had lost out throughout the entire Islamic world except in Spain. And there that dynasty continues to other generations. The center of it is the city of Cordova in southern Spain. There's a constant political breakdown. We talked earlier on about the Islamic resurgence or the surgence into Spain and how it became a Muslim peninsula earlier on, and then with the exception of that tiny little coastal area, remember, and then little by little the Christians reunited. Little by little they began driving the Muslims further and further south in this great reconquista that'll take over 700 years to accomplish. We're at the point now around 1000 where over half of Spain already now has been liberated and returned to Christianity. And Cordova is supposed to be the center that's going to oppose that, and it's not able to do that. However, while it doesn't have the political clout to do that, it has great areas of learning and study. Remember that that even Gerbert of Urlach had gone to Spain in order to study philosophy at the hands of the imams and the rabbis. So that's where you had to go to get that kind of learning, that philosophy. And there's one man in particular who we'll talk about later on in conjunction with St. Thomas Aquinas, because he is the man who's going to bring Aristotelianism to Western Europe. And he has one of these impossible long Arabic names. Okay, his name is Abu al-Wahib Adam Ibn Rushd.
Oh my God!
And in the West, he's simply known as Averroes.
Okay, good.
So, yeah, that's good. He's not particularly beloved within the Islamic circles, as we'll see later on. He takes Aristotle and swallows Aristotle whole hog. And Aristotle has elements in him that are as antithetical to Islam as he is to Christianity. And we'll see later on the brilliance of Thomas Aquinas being able to synthesize all of this. But anyway, just keep in mind, in Spain at the time is Averroes, and his bringing to the fore Aristotelianism. Over in Cairo, also, the Fatimids found a great college there, a great academy known as the Al-Azhar, and it is the gold standard for Muslim universities all the way to today. At least up until the 1950s, everyone looked to Al-Azhar as being the model. In some ways, we'd have to say, unfortunately, that's not true today, because what happened is that there have been a lot of freebooters and contractors that have set up their own schools, their own madrasas, which has radicalized Islam in a way that you would not have found in Cairo.
Right. Okay.
If we go over to Persia, also, again, we come across an incredible writer and philosopher who's dealing with these Greek ideas, Aristotle's ideas, and then at the same time trying to reconcile them with faith, in his case, Islamic faith. And his name is Avicenna. That's the Latinized form of Abu Ali ibn Sina. And what he does is metaphilosophy.
Oh.
That is to say, he takes philosophy, but he raises it to even a higher level. And he's trying, as I say, to balance off the teachings of the Prophet, as found in the Quran especially, and then also abstract reason, which is the challenge of Aristotle. And what his conclusion is, interesting conclusion, his conclusion is that there are actually two worlds. And there is what he refers to as the real world, which is the empirical world.
Okay.
But the other world is not an unreal world. It is an unphysical world, a spiritual world, God's world. And that these two worlds are side by side with each other. And we as human beings can only enter into the non-physical world, the non-empirical world, through portals that God creates for us. And he does this through dreams, through visions, through trances, apparitions, things of that nature, and that we are able to enter those portals, in other words, come in contact with the divine through a mystical spirituality, through meditation, through prayer, and through discipline. And this particular form of discipline is known in Islam as Sufism. It's a very interesting form of mystical discipline. Okay. We're going to find the same thing among Jews, and we'll find the same thing among Christians also. This is an age of great mysticism,
okay.
And some of the great mystics of the church are living during the same period of time. All of them trying to do the same thing that Avicenna is trying to do, trying to come in contact with the divine, and at the same to balance off what they accept as their revelation, whether it be the Old Testament, New Testament, or the Quran, and then balancing that off with pure reason, which the empirical that they deal with. Okay. One of the greatest writers of the age, in fact, he's often referred to as the St. Thomas Aquinas of Islam, lives during the same period of time. And in fact, outside of Baghdad, he has a great school there around the same time that the Seljuk Turks took over. And his name, again, is an impossible Arabic name. He is Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali. Now, al-Ghazali is, I have heard, I've read, that outside of the Quran itself, his writings are the most read in all of Islam.
Oh, really?
Even to this day.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, he establishes a great school, a madrasa, in order to study the Quran, the teachings of Muhammad, Islamic law. And in the process of doing that, you find this fascinating. In the process of doing all of this and all of this teaching, this great school, he had a nervous breakdown. And he turned to his disciples and he said this. He said, "All my learning is straw."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and that's almost 200 years later, Thomas Aquinas is going to try to do the same thing, try to destroy all of his work, saying all of my learning is straw. I don't even know that they knew. I mean, that Thomas even knew.
Right.
Al-Ghazali, but there you have it. And he was persuaded not to destroy everything. Instead, and his argument was, he told his disciples, my problem is I know a lot about God, but I don't know God. And so what he does instead is they say, well, go off and take a retreat someplace, which he did. And he went to Jerusalem, and he spent 10 years in Jerusalem where he came in contact with Sufism.
Okay.
And so rather than studying from the head, instead he studied from the heart. And he prayed. He went through the disciplines of meditation. And at the end of the 10 years, he returned to Baghdad and wrote a book. It's called The Revival of the Religious Sciences. And this is one of those great works that that Muslims turn to as they themselves are grappling with the question of divine revelation on the one side and empirical sciences on the other. His whole point is that study is nice. It's important to study. But ultimately, you come in contact with God. You come in contact with God through prayer and through ritual. Another just fascinating thing is in the 19th century here in the United States, there was an intellectual by the name of Orontes Brownson. And he was raised in the Unitarian Church, he was a New Englander, very anti-Catholic, and ultimately becomes one of the great defenders of the Catholic Church. He's buried, in fact, at Notre Dame University. And the same thing. His argument was that to come in contact with God, you've got to do it through ritual. And his argument was, and I'm sure a lot of his farmer friends and relatives were very upset with this. His
Right.
argument was, if you're going to do it as a Christian, then you've got to get back to the original, and that means the Catholic Church. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he was always a friend of Catholic bishops. He was very critical of 19th century bishops, especially Bishop Hughes in New York. But nonetheless, it's that same thing where an intellectual recognizes his intellect will only carry him so far. And then after that, he has to take that next step and come in contact with God through prayer and ritual. And this is exactly what Al-Ghazali does himself. So you live in the presence of God, and you do that through devout, prayerful life based upon Islamic law, the Sharia. That's your guiding principle. And what happens is that all throughout Islam, now there is a reawakening of this sense, and you have Sufi masters and ulemas, teachers, now traveling from one madrasas to another. They're like the rock stars of their age, and they're giving talks and sermons, and people are reforming their lives and living closer to the ideals of that Muhammad had developed when he was at Medina. And this devout life spreads. Islam reforms. There's a new breath of freshness that comes into it, and then a newer sense of the oneness, the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, everyone coming to being one together. It's ironic that at the very time this is happening, we're talking about the 1050s, it's ironic that in the West, Christianity splits in two. And even more so when you look at the Western European states, in which you have nationalism coming in and splintering Christendom into national entities, which continue down to today. There is only one force, one attraction, let me put it that way, that pulls everything back together in the West, and that's going to be the papacy itself. And we've just seen how the papacy was reformed through these reforms. It took 70, 100 years, whatever, to reform the papacy. But when you get to the 1050s and afterwards, as far as the Western Europe is concerned, the only thing that holds the church together is going to be the papacy. And otherwise, you've got these national groups.
The church together, or the West together?
In the West.
Okay.
Yeah, the church in the West.
The church in the West.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. In the East, it's a lost. Well,
right.
Constantly trying to reconcile, but in the West, you're going to have French kings that are going to demand obedience out of their French bishops. English kings, English bishops. German kings, German. We've already seen some of this already. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that all the bishops have in common is one pope.
Okay.
Well, over in Islam, let's go back to Islam for a bit there too. Not everybody is enamored with Sufi mysticism, or the new devout lives. There are some people who are upset with things not going as quickly as it could be, or going in their way as they would like. And there are those people who are going to try to usurp Islam to make it more along their notions.
Okay.
Remember, there's no pope in Islam, so there's no single central authority. And so those people who reject the Sufi mystics and the teachers, they're also going to be rejecting the caliphs. And they're going to see the caliphs as being worldly and not puritanical enough. And it's particularly among Shia that you're going to see this kind of disillusion with the world. And what they're going to do is, and their argument is going to be that all of these people are not Islamic enough. And you got to follow my form of Islam, my true form of Islam. And they are going to hate Turkish emirs. They're going to hate especially Sunni intellectuals. And what they will do, and especially this is a group of people, men, who are coming out of the Fatimid dynasty, and they're going to hate the Fatimids. They're going to hate the intellectuals. They're going to hate the Turkish emirs, even if they're way over in another part of the world. And what they'll do is they'll organize an underground network in order to get people to come over there to their position. And the only way they can do that is through terror. These are insurgents. And all throughout the Islamic world, you'll have elements of them, in some areas quite strong, in other areas not very strong. But they have one particular stronghold that's located in present-day Iran, and it's only about 60 miles away. It's a fortress about 60 miles away from the city of Tehran, and it's called Alamut. And the fortress of Alamut, it's still there. It's a historic site today. But the fortress at Alamut was a training camp for terrorists. Does this sound contemporary?
Yeah.
These men were trained to kill, and the term for this particular method of killing is called the hashashim. Now, to Western ears, what we heard was assassin. Assassins, yeah, and in history they're known as the assassins. They are the suicide bombers of their day. Obviously, they don't have bombs back then, but they did have knives. And the idea was that they would try to get close enough to an emir, or to a Sunni intellectual, or even a Sufist mystic, close enough, and then take out their knife and kill him. And kill a couple other people before they themselves would be cut down. They are going to, they're martyrs in their own mind. They're suicides. And what happens is that all throughout the Islamic world, we're talking about the 1050s, throughout the Islamic world, people are getting assassinated, and so the emirs themselves ratchet this up, and what they do is they have, of course, bodyguards around them. That removes them from the common people even more than they are to begin with. And then they begin to bring in secret police, informers, heavy-handed government, torturing people, and trying to catch plots before they get underway. And so then there's more resentment, you know, and it looks as though it looks pretty contemporary.
It does.
Yeah. Now, you know, and that's a good thing for us to think about then. Well, how did they solve it? And they did.
Oh, they did.
They
Okay,
did.
I was thinking that this was just continuing since then.
No.
Okay.
What happens
Well,
is...
this is important.
Yeah, it is. I think it's a good lesson for all of us, because what happens is that in the mosques and in the madrasas, the teachers and the scholars preach and teach and condemn the assassins, and argue that this is un-Islamic practice. To kill people like this is un-Islamic, and that they're not going off to heavenly reward. They're going off to hell for doing what they're doing. And here you heard people preaching these sermons and saying this, authorities within Islam, and the people then turn against these assassins. And so instead of abating them or even just being afraid of them, they then begin turning them in. Now, these assassins are going to be around for a long time. There are going to be elements that'll be there, and we'll see later on, even within the Crusades, there will be people who will be assassinated by these guys. But the reality is that they're not going to have the kind of traction, even today, that the terrorists have. They didn't have that kind of traction back then, because moderates stood up and said, no.
This isn't who we are.
Right. This is not who we are. Which is a very interesting thing, because, you know, just yesterday, the Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani in Iraq sent a fatwa to Muslims in Canada condemning attacks on Canada. Remember, there were a number of, 15 or so Canadian Muslims who were arrested this past week for plotting terrorist attacks. And here you have now, just yesterday, the Grand Ayatollah, the most respected figure in Shia Islam, condemns this kind of activity. Now, if more people got on board doing that whole thing of terrorism and all the kind of terrible stuff we've experienced in the last number of years would very quickly go away, just like it did in the 11th century. A little...
How do we get to them to do that?
Well...
Yeah, that's a...
They have to do it on their own. That's what happened.
Right.
In the 11th century, people just rose up on their own and said, no, this is not right. And... well, best we could do is pray, and as Christians, pray and encourage moderate Muslims to do the same thing. I tell you, the other thing too is if they look at their own history, they have to realize, and now most of this is actually coming from Sunni circles today. Certainly, Osama bin Laden and Sunni and Wahhabist and all, but. What happens in the 11th century is that Shiism is discredited by the assassins, and it becomes less and less a large number. In fact, even today, less than 20% of all Muslims are Shia, and this is the turning point that this happens. People begin looking at the Sunni as being reasonable, cultured, educated, and it's. There's a shift. In fact, at one time, we'll talk about later on, the entire country of Egypt shifts overnight from being Shia to Sunni.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
that's
like
coming later, you said.
It comes a little bit later. Yeah. But the reality is that, let's go back to those darn Turks. The Seljuk Turks are on the rise, and as much as moderate Muslims are pursuing their own holy lives, trying to live in accord to the Quran and Sharia, trying to be intellectuals and all this. There is another wing of Islam that is militant, besides the assassins, and that's the Seljuk Turks themselves. They have waged war on their own fellow Muslims. Between 1073 and 1092, a series of wars against the Fatimid Shia. As a result, they conquer Syria and then move into Anatolia, which is present-day Turkey. After all, Turkey is named after the Turks now. They weren't there at one time. And as they move into this area, they come across a Byzantine army. And the Byzantines were going to stop them in their tracks, they thought.
Okay.
And this is the Battle of Msgr. It's one of the important battles in history because it's a terrible defeat for the Byzantines, and that their army is practically destroyed, and all of Asia Minor now is opened up, and so the Turks now spread all the way to the Aegean Sea. This in 1080. Byzantium itself now is out of Asia. It might be on the Bosporus, but the fact of the matter is that it's only the Bosporus Straits that separates the Turks now from the Byzantine Empire, and they are really in bad shape. This is by 1880, you know.
Wow.
This also has a terrible detrimental effect on the West, and that has to do with the fact that many Christians made pilgrimages. This was a big part of the devotional life of Christians, and there were three centers of pilgrimages. There was to go to Rome. That was one of the great things that you could do in your life, is if you could make a pilgrimage to Rome. And we've already seen where Bishop Bruno of Tours often brought people down to Rome on pilgrimages before becoming, Pope Leo IX himself. The other was to head west toward Santiago de Compostela, and that was one of the really great pilgrimage routes also. And again, this was a pilgrimage of a lifetime to be able to do that. And then the third one, oh so great, was to go to the Holy Land itself. What a wonderful pilgrimage that would be. But it becomes really dangerous in the 11th century. I mean, in 1009, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was destroyed by the Muslims. This out of the Fatimid dynasty. And it wasn't until 1040 that they finally turned around to the Byzantine Empire and said, oh, we're sorry. If you'd like to build it at your own expense, we'll let you build it back up again. But the reality is that all throughout the 11th century, it is very dangerous for European Christians to go to the Holy Land, and so that's one part of a pilgrimage that is not...
Doesn't really exist.
Yeah, it's practically non-existent. Now, in the East itself, Jews, Christians, and Muslims had a tendency to live side by side in relative peace, and even within the holy city itself of Jerusalem. But by 1095, the Turks are going to be coming in, and they kind of mess all of this up. This little happy land there. These lands come under the control of a sultan, and the sultan. This is another Turkish term. It literally means the Seljuk warlord over all Turks. He then rejects. There's a respect for religious authorities, but there is also a rejection of other religions, and that includes, of course, Christians and Jews, who they now consider to be infidels, and also Shia Muslims are lumped in there too. Now, there are groups of Christians who are allowed to continue living in this area and under relative peace as long as you follow the rules. And these are, in particular, the Armenians. Armenians living in central present-day Turkey and over into the northeasternmost part of present-day Iraq. Okay, so you had Armenians living there. Also in Lebanon, the Maronite Christians. And these are Christians who have a great devotion to Saint Maro. He's a 5th century Lebanese saint, and the Maronite rite itself, of course, is from Lebanon, and it's allowed to exist. The Seljuk Turks allow it to exist, and then also there's the Jacobites. These are followers of yet another great Christian mystic of the 6th century. That's Jacob Baradaeus.
Where would they be,
And
Father?
that's also in the Middle East.
Still in the Middle East.
Right,
Okay.
yeah. Now, they were tolerated, but they had to pay extra taxes, okay, and they were not allowed to own weapons or horses, and they had to have they had to show public respect for Islam. So no Corpus Christi processions.
No.
Christians throughout the 11th century in the Middle East, even though they were technically tolerated by these sultans, the reality was that the wars that happened in Syria, in Anatolia, and then later into the Holy Land itself, that they're going to suffer from these wars, these civil wars, just as much as Sunnis will, or the Shia rather, as Shia Muslims will suffer at the hands of these Turks. And then pilgrims themselves are either going to be harassed or simply not allowed. So there you have the situation. And then in the Middle East, over in the West, a very different thing happening. In 1085, the city of Toledo is now brought again under Christian control for the first time in a couple hundred years. And there's a pope who is very much aware of all of this going on. Newly elected Pope Urban II. He also was one of the reformers. He's like the next generation of reformers, a follower of Pope Gregory VII. He's from France, the little city of Châtillon-sur-Marne, and had been the archdeacon at the cathedral at Rheims, had given up all of that position and went off to become a monk at Cluny, and then was tapped by Pope Gregory VII and brought to Rome, where he was made the Bishop of Ostia, which would make him, of course, the president of the College of Cardinals. Right. And so he succeeds then, becomes Pope in the last part of the 11th century, continues the battle against Henry the Fourth, and in that great battle of lay investiture, he'll wear him down until he dies. And at the same time, he's got some other problems. He's got to deal with King Philip I of France, who is a great lover of simony, who also threw his wife off to marry someone else, and Urban had to patch up that marriage. He had to deal with King William II of England. Again, big argument, contest between the Archbishop of Canterbury on the one hand and William on the other. The Pope is going to have to step in on all of this. And then all of a sudden, in March of 1095, he gets a letter from the East. This is from the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I, whose nickname is Komnenos. And he says, I need your help. Now, the schism has been going on for 41 years. And yet in the letter itself, he says, I need help, quote, for the defense of the Holy Church against the infidels. Yeah. The implication is, help me and we'll get back to talking again. So here's the possibility, that's that little carrot that's hanging out there. Now, the reason for the appeal in 1095 is, of course, that Christianity in the East is being pummeled pretty badly. Right. But it's also, that's on the strategic level. On the tactical level, it happens that this is a moment of weakness for the Seljuk Turks. Oh. In 1095, it turns out that temporarily there are two individuals who are claiming the Caliphate. Oh. I'm sorry, the Sultanate. Right, okay. The Sultanate, yeah. And one of those has set himself up in Baghdad, and he's occupying the eastern part of the Seljuk Turk Islamic Empire. Okay. And then in the west, there are actually two sons of the Sultan who are claiming to be his successor. One of them is in Damascus, and the other is in the city of Aleppo. And so Alexa sees this as a possibility. If he could, at this point, attack Asia Minor, he could drive the Turks out of Asia Minor and reestablish the eastern part, and therefore liberate all of those Christians who were living in that part of the Middle East. That's his hope. But he doesn't have any troops. They were all destroyed at that earlier battle. And so he turns to the Pope, seeking some kind of military aid. Urban goes to southern France, to Clermont, where there's a council that's been held. He's called a council. And on November 18th of 1095, he preaches a sermon to the council fathers and all those who have been gathered there. And in this, he describes some of the terrible conditions that Christians have been under in the Holy Land. And we're not really sure whether he was given false information on this or whether he was actually taking a lot of reports he had gotten, which are accurate, but pulling them all together into a single. We're not real sure. And we don't have the actual transcript of his speech. What we have is recollections that happened that are written down afterwards and are used in order to preach the crusade.
Okay.
So it's a little shaky on, but anyway, it sounds as though there he described in lurid detail the persecution of Christians in Jerusalem, which would not have been accurate at that particular moment. But as I say, there are elements of it, and the reason I use a little time on this is because there are historians who are who have an axe to grind against the Crusades themselves.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Well, in fact, there's a lot of revisionist stuff that's come out in the last century against the Crusades, and many of them will use this as an opportunity to say, well, he led us into war, and he didn't have the facts and all that sort of thing. He lied and millions died, But the reality is that particular speech, we're not entirely sure what he said or how he said it, and we're not entirely sure whether he was pulling together lots of true reports that he had received in one single thing, or whether or not he was making this up. And if he was making it up, it was accurate in many different spots.
Right.
So anyway, I leave that for people to ponder, but I think it's important for us to know that when you sit down and read any particular historian, you better be seeing whether or not they're being totally accurate or whether or not they're trying to sell you a bill of goods. So a little something to keep in mind.
Very important, as I have been hearing more things about the Crusades, and that is something for us to take note of.
Yeah, and I hope that as we go through this, I hope to be as objective as possible, and I hope to also bring in some very contemporary work that's being done, very reasonable work, and one of those is from one of our professors at St. Louis University, Dr. Thomas Madden, who's done some really wonderful books on the Crusades, and I think we'll see a little bit later on some of his logical points in which he kind of puts things in perspective.
I think he just had a seminar not too long ago about the Crusades, didn't he? I think because one of my friends was going to go, and I had hoped to go, wasn't able to make it. And it sounded like it was going to be very good.
Anyway, he's got a couple really good books out. One is he confesses is a coffee table version of the Crusades, but it's a neat little book. It really is. And then, of course, he's got more serious histories also.
Great.
So there's some good people out there doing some good work.
And from St. Louis, no less.
That's right, yes. Pope Urban calls on a holy war to restore Palestine. And at this time, he... In that sermon that he preaches this as a way of making amends for the sins of Christian Europe. Obviously, Christian Europe has not been as holy as one would hope, and within living memory, we could have remembered that. This is a way to make up for that. He also promises that those who go on the Crusades, those who will be crusaders taking up the cross, if they go to confession and are in a state of grace, and if they die on that crusade, he promises them that they would merit heaven. again, this has been taken out of context. Did you hear a bunch of ifs there?
Yeah.
And a lot of people have forgotten those ifs parts, but there's a series of qualifications. It's just not a question of taking up the cross and then going off and doing whatever you want. The Fourth Crusade is an example of that.
It reminds me of a plenary indulgence. It's not just saying your rosary with somebody. There's conditions involved.
There's conditions involved, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So what happens is then he travels all throughout France and rallies nobles particularly to his side. He appoints one bishop in particular to act as the, I guess you could say, spiritual director of this effort. His name is Bishop Adamar, and he's the bishop of the small diocese of La Paix. He's the titular head, and I don't know whether or not he actually traveled with them. I kind of lost contact with him after that point, except he's going to appear in a dream later on, which is an interesting thing. But some of those who did rally to the side of the Pope were, right from the very beginning, Robert, the Duke of Normandy. So notice we're going to be talking about noblemen, but we're not going to be talking about royalty. There is no king that rallies to the side of the Pope in this. So Robert, Duke of Normandy. You have Hugh, the Count of Vermandois. Also Count Baldwin of Flanders, northern France. And then along with him, his own brother, Godfrey de Bouillon, who was just a really respected man. He's the Duke of Lorraine. The Count of Toulouse, a man by the name of Raymond de Saint-Gy. And then Bohemond, the son of Roger Guiscard, who is the conqueror of Sicily.
Oh.
So, interesting group of guys. Everything seems to be going fine. They all say, yep, we'll help you. We need to go back and start bringing some men together, arms. We'll start preparing and get this thing underway. But things got absolutely out of control because everyone caught on to this crusader spirit. And then you had these like itinerant street preachers that went around preaching this great crusade. And by golly, I mean, if they had televisions back then, they would have been the televangelists, you know. They all had big hair, you know, and southern accents, and they're just going on with the flashy suits, and they're getting all the peasants all worked up, and so the peasants decide they're going to join in. Well, while the professionals are all off home getting ready professionally, this whole other group decides they're going to go do it themselves. And there are two individuals in particular that sort of lead this ad hoc crusade. I can only imagine, if the Pope even knew about this, what he must have been thinking. It's like, oy vey, what are they doing? But anyway, these two inspirations are Peter the Hermit, and the other one is known in English history as Walter the Penniless.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but his actual name was Walter Sans Savoir, which, if my French serves me, savoir means to know and sans means without. So I guess that would be Walter the Clueless. Anyway, under that inspiration, they marched out all from all over France. Peasants just took whatever they could, and then hundreds and hundreds of them joined up and just began marching towards southern Germany. And as they moved through France and into southern Germany, people along the way applauded them, gave them gifts, and said, keep going. You know,
Don't stop here.
Don't stop here. You know. In some cases, they did. In some cases, they stayed around for a couple days, couple weeks. They plundered, especially into Jewish neighborhoods, and in some cases, some unscrupulous people would actually hire them to act as thugs in order to
take care of whatever they wanted.
Take care of debtors. Yeah, it was pretty ugly, And in many ways, this is the roots of anti-Semitism in Jewish history, because there's this huge separation that takes place between the Jewish populations and the Christian populations that would not have been there before. And we'll see, I think a little bit later on, I'll be able to show how many Christian preachers, and I'm thinking in terms of some of the great saints, Bernard of Clairvaux for one, traveled, especially in Germany, at the requests of bishops to preach against anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. And there are some other itinerant monks who are going to go around making a living on anti-Semitism, and these will be doing the opposite of that. So anyway, that's another aspect. Once they got out of Germany, they made their way to Hungary, where the king immediately gave them all kinds of provisions and moved them very quickly to Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, they didn't have any money to move them on, and so there was lots of fighting and battles, and it was just ugly. And when they finally arrived, they arrived in the fall of 1096. You can imagine what the Emperor Alexius thought when he saw this rabble of thousands of peasants arrive. You know, that darn Urban. And of course, Urban had nothing to do with this.
Right.
So what they did was, he fed them, provisioned them, put them on ships, and shipped them across the Bosporus right away. And then said, go get...
Good luck.
yeah, good luck. Go get Nicaea. It's only 60 miles away. And this ragtag group, literally thousands of peasants, made their way, it's called the People's Crusade, made their way in this 60-mile trek to Nicaea. They never got there. They were cut down by professional Turkish armies, and by and large, most of them were killed. There was one party that succeeded in taking up to a hilltop fortress, and they held out for 8 days, and they did this without water.
Oh my gosh!
And by the time it came to an end, they were exhausted, and they agreed to surrender. And when they did, they were allowed to do one of two things: they could either convert to Islam, or they would be sold as slaves. And some of them converted to Islam. Those others who refused were sold. Some of them were sold as slaves. Some of them never made it to the slave trade. They were used as target practice by the Turkish army. Really a terrible, terrible thing. Interestingly enough, Peter the Hermit was not among that number. Before things fell apart, he made his way back to Constantinople. So he got out alive.
So maybe his name wasn't too apropos.
Well, now this isn't Walter the Clueless.
It's not Walter.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what happened to Walter.
It wasn't
the
Mr.
Clueless.
Penniless. It was the Hermit.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is Peter the Hermit. In the process, the other professional armies made their way down, and perhaps next time around when we get together we can talk about, they basically came in 3 different waves, 3 different routes, and then when they arrived then in Constantinople, here you have the professional Christian force that Alexius had first asked for. They are going to have great success, and then in the end, they're going to be stabbed in the back by none other than the emperor himself. And he does that with the aid of one of the Western Christian knights. Oh, it's a sad story. But they are going to succeed in taking Jerusalem. They will establish a series of 4 Latin kingdoms in the region, and at least the First Crusade is going to seem to be a success. But we'll save that for next time.
Okay. That's great. Thank you, Father.
Yes.
And shall we close with the prayer and your blessing?
Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
May Almighty God bless you. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you, Father.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.